Welcome back to People and Power. In today's program, we're looking at Exxon Mobil, the world's leading oil producer, which is embroiled in a legal battle over its security arrangements in Aceh, Indonesia, during the country's recent civil conflict. The firm is accused of hiring Indonesian soldiers who allegedly kidnapped, tortured, and killed suspected insurgents posing a threat to Exxon's plant. Survivors of these alleged attacks put the blame on Exxon Mobil, but the firm denies any wrongdoing. Juliana Ruhfus continues her investigation on the ground in Aceh.
Having been to the plant, it was easy to see how close the barracks and the plant are to the villagers. But how could victims be sure it was Exxon Mobil soldiers who committed abuses?
Exxon will get to ask them that very question. Are you sure it was them? And they're going to say yes, either because they saw it or where it happened. I mean, there are some places where our clients were injured where the Exxon Mobil troops were stationed. And so that certainly increases the probability that it was an Exxon Mobil soldier who did it. But the way it's going to work in court is my clients can say whatever they think is true, and Exxon Mobil will try to question their credibility, and then the jury gets to decide who they believe. We will now get from Exxon their records of payments to particular soldiers, particular battalions, and we will be able to prove through Exxon that what my clients say is true, that there is a permanent or a relatively permanent group of soldiers that are specialized in protecting Exxon.
Soldiers were entering the village and chasing people. It was midnight on a Friday. I was taken and I was accused of having money from the guerrillas. My eyes were blindfolded and I was hit in the stomach and head. They used guns and bayonets on my back, and I was praying to God all the time to help me. I was put in the back of a truck and hit again, and then I fainted. I think I was brought to A13. I didn't see it, but I knew we were there because I could feel the way the truck was going. And Musley, my friend, told me. He could see. I was scared to death, scared I was going to die. I'd already heard of A13 because I lived near it, and everyone was very frightened of it. We were then taken to the police station. Our health was not good. We were so badly beaten and electrocuted. They laid me flat, and they had a bayonet. Sometimes it didn't pierce the skin, so they took a knife to pierce the skin, and they wrote GAM on my back. Exxon should be responsible, because it was their soldiers who caught me. It was A13, which was the unit hired by Exxon to protect them.
But even if it can be demonstrated that it was Exxon Mobil soldiers, couldn't Exxon argue that they didn't know what was going on?
It would be impossible for them not to know. But yes, if they could establish that in hiring the Indonesian military and providing them with material support, including guns, supplies, jeeps, and money, and then across a period of years, with all the human rights reports coming in about the atrocities, they didn't know. If someone believes that, then Exxon's off the hook, but no one's going to believe that. The major human rights organizations, including Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, had discussions that put Exxon Mobil on notice. If Exxon empowered and provided assistance to a group of soldiers, and in the course of their duties of providing security for Exxon Mobil, murdered or tortured or disappeared someone, that meets our legal standards for aiding and abetting the substantive violation. So Exxon does not need to have itself had an employee hold up a gun.
I was picked up by soldiers in my village and was hit several times, and I was taken to A1, a military post. I was hit so badly, all my lower lip was torn and pulled down. My face was swollen and bloated. I was accused of being linked to the GAM rebels, but I knew nothing. My family and children were threatened. I had a little girl of 2 months old, and she was thrown out of the house into the mud and rain. My village is close to Exxon. Their soldiers often walked through it. They chatted but weren't friendly. You could tell from the emblem anyway who they were. I went to Banda to lodge a complaint, and since I did that, I was pursued. I felt like a fugitive, and I haven't been back to my village.
You can't go in there and do business with known human rights violators and claim that you're not responsible for it, because you're empowering them. And I think that the precedent that Exxon will add to that is that it's the largest oil company in the world, and they will put everything that they can possibly do into this, including use their political influence to try to stop this case. But once we prevail, I think it'll show that no one is above the law, and that simple villagers from Aceh with lawyers can take on the largest corporation in the world.
I am sad because I couldn't send my family money. I didn't see my daughter growing up. For 3 years, I couldn't look after my family. Exxon should take responsibility. I didn't work for 3 years, so yes, I want compensation. I want the soldiers moved out of the area. I can see them, and it brings back memories of trauma and terror.
The case has now entered the discovery stage, when evidence is collected to take to court. As it continues, the story of what happened in Aceh is beginning to unfold.
In January, a U.S. appeals court ruled that Exxon Mobil must respond to the lawsuit brought against it by the Indonesian plaintiffs. We asked Exxon Mobil to appear on the program, but they declined our invitation. They did, however, issue the following statement. If troops assigned to provide security for the project acted outside the conventional rules of military defense, Exxon Mobil does not condone any such activity. Exxon Mobil was not involved and strongly condemns any human rights abuses which occurred in this region or elsewhere in the world. Joining me to discuss big business and human rights is Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She now heads Realizing Rights, an initiative focused on ethics and globalization. Mary Robinson, Exxon Mobil isn't the only oil company that's been in the firing line on human rights. We've had Total, the French company, in Myanmar. We've had Shell in Nigeria. What is it about oil, gas, and mining companies that puts them in the spotlight on human rights?
The extractive industries is the sector that tends to give rise to the most problems of violations. And it's because they are extracting oil, gas, minerals. They're doing it very often in countries with weak governments, with conflict perhaps in the areas with indigenous peoples or small ethnic groups, and quite often the use of local military to protect the installations, pipelines, premises. This is why it was necessary to have the voluntary principles on human rights and security.
In their defense, companies often say, we just operate. We don't own the mine. We don't own the oil field. We're not the government. We don't supply the army. We're not responsible for that. We're not to blame. Do you think that's a sufficient defense?
That used to be the acceptable situation. It no longer is. There is more and more an understanding that there is a responsibility where there is power.
So it's not enough, you're saying, for companies to say, well, look, we're not actually breaking any laws in this country. So really, our primary responsibility is to our shareholders to make money. We're looking after ourselves. We're not breaking the law in this country. Again, why are we to blame? You're saying that's not enough anymore.
That's not enough anymore. And indeed, some companies were, in my view, quite unexpectedly found not to be meeting their responsibilities. I'm talking about IT companies, major IT companies in their doing business in China. The IT companies found that they were getting very serious criticism, and now they are meeting with human rights groups. They've come together to work in solidarity, if you like, with each other to develop principles for operating in countries that try to suppress information.
In the extractive industries, oil, gas, mining, they do have a set of voluntary principles on security and human rights. And yet, just having them is not enough. Implementing them is another matter. How effective do you think these voluntary principles are?
The voluntary principles on security and human rights are not working as well as they should. Companies are not adhering in a full-hearted way. Some of them are, and others are not. But there's no way of making it a core standard while it's still voluntary.
So much more work on this front required. Thank you very much, Mary Robinson. That's all for today's program, but for more on today's story and to share your ideas about people and power in your world, visit our website, aljazeera.net/English. Join us again next time. Goodbye.